Okay, I'm live on YouTube. And let's see, we will copy this. Copy. Okay, I am live on YouTube. And I have to plug in my mouse here. Hold on. There we go. Keep my mouse from getting crazy. And I center myself. Here we go. Much better centered. How is everybody doing today? Oh, good. My mouse, my speakers are or my headphones are actually doing something. That's always good to hear. It's okay today. All right. Well, projects are due tomorrow, right? Yeah. Okay. Just making sure that the word has gotten out. We've already had extra time, so that's everyone should be way ahead of the game now, right? Tomorrow, end of day. That is correct. Now, I did post a fairly recent video that was just 10 minutes long talking about the quote unquote, the one project to rule them all sort of thing. And that is an optional step right now with regards to your first submission. So there'll be a submission point on LMS, which is going to have basically what you to do on LMS is you're going to put a one paragraph description of your game, any cheat codes necessary, sort of thing. And that's, the spot on LMS. That's where your grade is going to wind up going. And then other than that, I'm going to really look at and make sure that you have submitted everything and that I can get at everything through the Unity collaborative server. And not everybody has shared that with me yet. So I'm always a little nervous until I get all the projects in. But the important thing is that project that you wind up sharing on the Unity collaboration server, ultimately, you only have to set that up once, which is the cool thing, right? That's the idea. So that every subsequent project, project 2, project 3, you won't have to go through that process again, right? And that is why the one project to rule them all thing sort of exists. So let me sort of run you through that just a tad more, just to kind of get the idea, right? Because what happens, see, here's my desktop, and here are my projects in Unity. And as you can see, I've got a whole lot of projects in Unity. And what happens is, sometimes people keep me as part of their project team so I can help them with other things in the future. Or Unity is sometimes a little bit odd about, clearing things out and so on. And what I want to have is one project for each of you, right? I don't want to have 4 projects for each of you. I want to have one project for each of you, right? So that makes things a lot easier to deal with. Now, for example, the idea here, and hopefully Unity will open up in the other screen, and the tutorial is out there, and there's also a asset pack, a package that I created that will have the sort of set up the scripts if you need them to handle it. If you want to do it all on your own and it works on your own, that's fine as well. If you want to customize it, you can start with that, and things are cool. But I did provide that asset package on Discord, and I'll post another copy of that on LMS as well if you need it, or if you haven't gotten it, or let me know. And Unity is taking some time to open up here, of course. Be a little slow today. Come on, Unity, 48 seconds. There we go. All right, so this is the idea, right? You'll see that there is a main screen here called main menu. And then, so what should happen if I hit play, if I open up your project and I hit play, I should be presented with this. Ultimately, whether or not the first version, if I just hit play and it goes into your room-based adventure game, that's okay. But in subsequent ones, next time around, I'm going to hit play. I'm going to see, okay, your RCS ID, that's your name here. And you can customize this screen all you like. And I should be able to press adventure and get to your adventure game. I should be able to press apple tree, which is your next project. We'll talk a little bit more about today, and so on, right? So there's the idea that there's a simple way to get to all 4 of your projects, and there's a main screen that has your customization. Go nuts on this one. Go ahead, put animations, put screens, put whatever you want on. You can put whatever you want on this screen to customize it, make it your own. But the idea is that there be one project that has all 4 sub projects in it, so that I don't have 4 Unity team collaboration things to deal with. All right, that's the main idea there. All right. Yes, it can be a separate name. As long as it's obvious enough to me to know that, that I need to go, like, this is project 1 should be the first one. Project 2 should be the second. Project 3, project 4, you can, all of the names are completely arbitrary as long as it works, right? I'm just providing one where, so what it is. And I put the underscores at the beginning of them just so that, just in case you'd already, had an underscore adventure or you had, you had an adventure game or an apple tree game or something, it wouldn't clash. So I just did that so that it would be not get in the way of anything that you might already have. That's the key there, right? So that should be fairly easy to install. And like, you use assets and you say import package, custom package, and that's where you would add that package fall 2020 scenes.unity package that I posted, right? If you say to go ahead and do that, you say open. In this case, it actually shows me that they're already all there. So there's been no changes. Well, I guess it wants to load that one. And if I say import, it might say, oh, there's nothing to import. You already have all those things in your project. So I must have been missing one. It's okay. So that's the idea behind that one. All right. Don't worry. Don't let it upset your apple cart with regards to your current project, though. Get your current project done. Get that all set to go before you worry about this one necessarily. But don't create a new project when you're done with it. You're going to use your same old project. You're just going to add this stuff to it, right? So watch that other video for the details on how to put this together if you need to. I'm not going to go into all the crazy details on it now. All right, so I am going to exit this project, and hopefully the Unity Hub is still open for me here somewhere. Unity Hub, where are you? Well, that's interesting. All right. And I'm going to open the fall 2021. I created a new template for 2021. I'm not thinking that far in the future. Crazy, right? Okay, so let's open my project that is the 2020 project. Now, for the most part, we're going to start talking about things today in the lecture portion. And what I'm going to do is I want to do about an hour worth of lecture, which is our, is going to be a lot of new stuff. You shouldn't need any of that. And what I'm going to do, what I've started to do in one of the other classes, because to get sort of the check-ins to go a little bit quicker, sometimes I'm going to do the check-ins basically by text as opposed to screen sharing, because that makes it go a lot faster. So we are sort of back to square one with regards to the check-ins, I think. I don't know if I really had proper check-ins with everybody on different things anyway. So assume this is an odd week, and I'm really just going to be text chatting with most people to kind of see, how are you doing on the project. But I really want the second half of the class to be dedicated towards working on the project and making sure if you have any questions that they get answered and so on, right? So I'm going to try to check in with the people that I think are today's check-ins. And I'm going to do it via just simple texting and not screen sharing, unless you need to, unless you've got a specific issue that you want me to screen share, and then we can certainly do that. All right. So here's my scene. Now, actually, I think I had created a, did I have a main scene in this one? I forget. Yeah, I had a main button here that would take me to the adventure scene. Or supposed to take me to adventure scene. So I sort of have a weird version of this one here. There's my main scene here. And I want to talk about a couple of things. And some of it is going back a little bit to C# programming. And some of it is going to be new stuff with regards to Unity. And the idea is basically we're going to talk about collections and multiples and how we're dealing with things actually in the game. And it's a requirement of our next program, because our next program is going to be based on a classic arcade game and sort of arcade genre. What was originally known, Activision created this game called Kaboom, or the Mad Bomber, where there would be a Mad Bomber that moved across the top of the screen. It would drop bombs down, and you had to catch them in a basket, or else the bombs would blow up, sort of thing. And we're going to emulate that game, but called an apple picker version, which is a non-violent version of our Kaboom game. So that's the sort of idea behind that. Let's see if I have two sort of different lectures that I'm going to kind of pop back and forth between, actually. Let's see here to kind of cover the gamut of things here. Let's open in a new tab, that one, and let's open this one over here. Because we did talk a little bit about rigid bodies and the other things before in a little example last time in our title screen, but so I want to get back to them just a little bit. But let's talk about collections, sprites, and prefabs, right? So prefabs are definitely going to be a new concept. It's going to be a very important concept, and we're going to use those in coordination with collections quite a bit. And we're also going to talk about some of the kind of unique aspects of sprites in Unity as well, because sprites, there's sort of a way to deal with like multiple sprites and sprite sheets and all kinds of things within Unity that sometimes it makes sense to kind of cover them as part of collections. And we'll see how that goes. So it's all about dealing in multiples of things. Like you have a flock of seagulls, a flock of birds, a herd of cattle, a collection of whatever, a collection of Lego, and something like that. So anyway, let's talk about what do I mean by collections. So in C# and in lots of programming languages, there are collections. So a collection is in C# is a group of several things that are referenced by a single variable name or variable as a single variable, right? It's similar to having, imagine a pride of lions or a colony of ants or a murder of crows or a flock of seagulls or a coven of witches, that sort of thing, right? You have these groups that you can then refer to as a single unit, and you can even like figure out, okay, let's look at the elements of that unit as well. All right. Now there are two, the two most important C# collections are lists and arrays, and there are other types of collections as well, but we're really going to start with and kind of hopefully wrap our brains around lists and arrays. And they're also very popular in use in Unity specifically because they are nicely integrated with the inspector. And if they're public, we can see them easily in the inspector. So we can kind of look and see, okay, how many things are in our list or how many elements are in our array. If we have an array of game objects, we can get to those different elements and so on. So that's one of the nice things that we get as a part of this integration between Unity and C#. So we have lists and arrays. Both appear public in the inspector. Now, lists also tend to be the more flexible of the two. They're far more an actual kind of grown-up data structure as opposed to an array, which is just a chunk of memory that contains, kind of object after object after object or variable after variable after variable. An array is a much more simpler kind of structure, but it's more primitive. So we like lists because conceptually they are kind of more flexible and can do a bunch of cool stuff that we need them to do. So I like to start with lists. So when you're starting out, lists are really great because they do a lot of things kind of for you. So the idea is you have a list. So a list of what? So C#, we like to use types, right? We like for C#, C# likes to be strongly typed whenever we can, right? So we are dealing with collections that have a certain type. Now, do you actually need a separate data structure called a list of strings or a list of floats or a list of whatever custom class, a list of witches, that would be called a coven, a list of birds, that would be called a flock? Now, if you actually had to maintain and manage all sorts of different custom types that were custom lists for that particular type, that would be awful, and it would be a pain in the butt. Okay, you wouldn't want to have, a million different data structures for a million different types of, things that you could have just because you wanted to contain multiples of them, right? It's fine having different objects to represent a substantially different thing, but it'd be nice to be able to extend those into collections in some kind of standard way. And that's what the list structure is all about, right? A list is called a generic collection, right? A generic collection. And we'll see, you may recall we had these kind of angled, these carets here, these kind of, less than, greater than looking style of brackets, right? List and then of string. That's what these little carets, sideways brackets, sideways angled brackets, they designate when something is a generic, right? And we're going to use the type that is within those brackets to impose a class or a type or a variable type onto a generic collection, right? So we can say a list of whatever type we want, right? We don't have to have a specific type of list to deal with game objects. We just have a list. And we say, when we're creating it, though, you have to create them for that type. So we would say list of string is called string list. Okay, now we go ahead. We have a list of strings that we can use. We say list game object go list, game object list. And now we have a list of game objects. You really don't want, and I think you can't, I haven't tried this in a while, but, there are ways, but for all practical purposes, from now through this course, assume and build your lists that they only contain a single type of object, right? So you have a list of strings, you have a list of game objects, you have a list of whatever, right? You shouldn't be mixing them like some string lists and some strings and some game objects. You really can't do that. Shouldn't do that. Even if you found some clever way to do it, don't do it. Okay. So this creates a reference to a list of that type, right? So this is the first part here. List, string, string list. That gives us a reference to a string. But in and of itself, it's just a reference, and it's just a null reference. So there's nothing in it. There's actually no list associated with it. This is just a reference to that list. So then you have to initialize it before you can use it, right? Because it has some data structure. It has some guts and plumbing and stuff that it uses to keep track of the objects and the elements of the list. So you have to call and initialize it, right? Because lists default to null otherwise. So you would say, after creating the list, saying list, string, string list, you say string list, str list equals new, right? So we're instantiating this list of strings now. This is installing the plumbing underneath this reference, okay? So you'll always see this list, string, string list, and then you can combine these two if you want. You could say list, string, string list equals new list, string. You can do that if you want to put it all in one line. But you do need these two operations. You need a declaration and an initial instantiation or assignment here. Okay, that sets up your list. You can now use it. You have a piece of paper on your pad that you can then start writing your elements onto your list. You can make a shopping list, for example. Okay. So the first thing you probably want to do if you create a list is you want to add things to that list. You want to put things on your list. And handily, there is a add method for the list. So after you create the list, you can then say string list.add, and it will go ahead and add the string hello to that list. So that'd be the first thing on the list. Then you can add another thing, add world to the list. So now you have a list of 2 words, the first one being hello, the second one being world. So far, so good, right? Let me pop this window out and allow for questions or comments. Comment here. Okay. And as usual, if you do want to have your cameras on or whatever, raise your hands, talk, kind of stuff. That's cool too. I encourage people to participate. All right. So say you have things in the list, and then you want, of course, it's no good if you can only put stuff on the list. You want to be able to reference the stuff on the list, right? Because you're keeping track of them so that you can look back at them. So you can get to the grocery store and say, what things do I need to buy that I put on my list? So for that, we are going to use another type of brackets. We have a way of accessing the elements, the items, the members, right? And this is going to be similar to other collections as well. In order to access the elements of the list, we use square brackets, right? The square brackets, and we say, what index number or what element number do we want to reference? The one tricky thing, if you're not familiar with zero indexing, is that this is zero indexed, right? You basically can think of this as being at what offset is this item in the list. So an item that has zero offset is the first item in the list, right? The idea is that, it is at position 0. There's no offset between it and any other item. That's why it's called 0. Right? Some other languages are indexed with 1, but all of the sort of C#, C++ languages that I know and love all are generally 0 indexed. So in this case, if I put print, I put hello and world in my list, I could then say print string list 0. That'll give me hello. Print string list 1. That will print world. Done. Great. It works, right? So I can get that. Now, there are ways to also say, okay, on your list, how many items are there on the list? How many elements are there on the list? How many, things do I need to want to get to the grocery store? You can easily query the list and say, okay, stringlist.count. That will give you the count of things on the list. So if you're using your list, say, to keep track of apples falling from a tree, perhaps, and the tree had dropped 3 apples and none of them had been destroyed because they're all just freshly dropped, you would say stringlist.count, and it would say 3. There are 3 apples, and then you could say, okay, let me process those apples 0, 1, 2. Those are the 3 apples that are in my list, 0, 1, and 2. Okay. There's a handy shortcut for clearing all the elements of a list. You can just say stringlist.clear and call that function. It'll empty the list. Remove everything from the list. So if you destroyed all the apples or you destroyed all the enemies, all the asteroids, all the whatever it is you're keeping track of, you can clear the list when you're done with them. All right. There's additional methods as well. So you can do all of these things sort of on the list. Now imagine we had a list of strings that contain these 4 strings, A, B, C, and D. They're not much in the way of strings, but they consider them strings. Apple, Beta, Charlie, Delta. Oh, no, sorry. So it'd be Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. If you want to turn them into real strings. So we wanted to print the first one. We would just get print string list 0 gives us A, alpha. There it is. Boom, done. Now if we wanted to say add Apple, whenever you add something, you add it to the end of the list. If you clear the list, boom, get rid of all of them. There, it is now empty after you did the clear. Whoops. There we go. At which point you can, of course, reinitialize the list. Clearing it actually totally destroys everything. All right. So you can reinitialize the list, and now we've got A, B, C, D again. Other cool functions, other interesting things that we can use to manage the list and manage the objects on the list. We can figure out where in the list is a certain element, right? So you could say, okay, find, is there something called B in that list or something that contains B in the list? If so, return the index. So B is at element 1. So this will return 1, index 1. If I asked okay, give me the index of Bob, who doesn't exist in the list, it would return -1, saying it's not in the list. So you couldn't do anything with it. Okay. So that's, finding a specific thing in the list, searching through the list, right? If there were multiple things named that, it would return the first item of that at the list. Okay. It won't return an array of those, I don't think. Yeah. Haven't tried that in a while. If you want to insert something at a specific location, instead of just at the end of the list, you can insert at a certain point, in which case it will insert it at that point and push things out down the line. So if I say insert to X, it's going to put X at the second element and push C and D toward the end. If I said insert for X, it puts X at 4 and pushes D, and so on. Okay. One thing to be careful of is you cannot insert an element out of, past the end of the range. It does not automatically create space at the end because there would be a gap in there. Right? Can't do that. There's also remove, which allows us to remove the first element that it finds that matches that. So say you wanted to remove C, that would remove that. Or you can remove things at certain locations in the list. So if you wanted to remove the thing at 1, which in this case was B, you could say remove that 1 and get rid of that. Boom, done. It pushes everything after that spot into a higher index, right? Yes. So like here, X is now the middle one, and C and D both, they actually are now element 3 and 4, right? Where they were 2 and 3 before. Okay. Now, there is a handy way. In certain circumstances, you will sometimes find this useful to be able to convert from lists to arrays. Right? Sometimes there are occasionally a few Unity functions, perhaps, that only deals with or only returns an array. Like if you do certain types of get child component of, sort of thing, that might return an array of children components as opposed to a list of components. So you may have to use the string list dot to array to convert a string list to an array for the sake of Unity if it wanted to in certain circumstances. So those are lists. Whew, that's lists. Now we're going to take a breath, drink some wonderful watermelon water. Sparkling watermelon. And arrays. We'll talk about arrays now. So arrays, when I say an array is a much simpler collection than a list, I mean in terms of the actual structure in the programming language. Now, whether or not it's simpler to use, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't, right? It's simpler because it's not really a class, right? It's not a structure. It's not a template. It's really just a room in memory for multiple things of that type. So it has very little functionality kind of built into it. Right? Try to keep it, there's a little bit, but not much. And especially as you start adding and removing elements and things, you'll notice the differences. Okay, so an array is much simpler collection. It's not actually its own data type at all, but rather it's just a collection of any data type, right? So you won't see anything really called an array. So here I declared an array of strings is really just by saying string and then 2 square brackets and any name at all, right? There's no real place where I say, oh, give me an array, as opposed to like when we explicitly said, give me a list, right? So this creates an array of strings an array of strings called string array. And again, this is just a reference to it right away. So they are created with a fixed length, which limits their usefulness. What does that mean? A fixed length. Well, imagine when we're setting up this string array, we say string array equals new string 4. You have to tell it how big the array is going to be that you're using. So this is going to say, okay, this is an array of 4 strings. Or you could even say string array equals new string with just empty brackets like this and say A, B, C, D. That would also create a string array with 4 strings in it. Now, the thing about it is that you cannot add an additional string to this array. You cannot really subtract one from that array without really kind of destroying that array and creating a new one, right? Lists are cool. They have links inside, potentially they're linked lists. They have all kinds of data structures that allow you to insert elements and efficiently do that. Where an array, like I said, it's just memory. So you just allocate kind of a chunk of memory and then it's there to use as you see fit, but it doesn't really have the methods and plumbing to do much more than that. So it's really fixed in length. If you set it up as 4, it has 4. Right. When you're accessing elements, though, it does look an awful lot like lists. You can access them the same way. So if we said string array 1 equals Bob for an assignment, then you could access Bob as saying string array 1, that is Bob. Okay. One interesting thing is you can elements in array. And so you can assign something to the 4th element, or sorry, to the 4th element, which is actually referenced by 3, because it's already allocated. The space is already there as soon as you set it up. Right? So for example, here we're going to have a string array that has 4 slots for strings in it. You can see here, the first one has A in it after assignment. The rest are just null. So you could say string array 2 equals C, leaving these other ones just null. That's their default values there. All right. If you try to reference these strings, you would actually get a null back. If you try to dereference them, you try to actually use them, you might have an error because there are no actual strings there. They're just kind of placeholders for them. That'll become more obvious, the potential for them as we start to use them. And just to make life interesting, instead of a count, we have a length. So arrays have a length, arrays have length, lists have count, right? You count the items on a list, you calculate the length of an array. So a string is different than a list, right? A string is actually a collection of characters. So a string has a length, but a list has a count. Strings are another thing. Strings are a special sort of collection, even though we referred to them all over the place here. Strings are a special collection. They are a collection of characters, right? Strings are not just an array of characters. They are a collection of characters. So that's why we have this special class or variable type called a string. Right? It's very different than an array of characters. It has lots of functions that you can do with it. Okay. Array methods that we have, well, they're not methods in the same way as we would have methods of, kind of a full-fledged class or a full-fledged template like strings and lists. So there's kind of minimal things we can do. We can always use the square brackets to access a certain element of an array. We can set that element according to that index and so on. This would it'll allow us to do things like this, like say, okay, give me element 10 of this string array, but that will fail because that's beyond the length of our 4 string array. So that gives us an error. It's not really smart about that. We'll potentially crash there if we're not careful. There are a few static global methods of the system array class. If you want to get fancy, there are ways to sort of change the length of an array, but it's really expensive, and it's at the system level. It does things like, get rid of an array and create a whole brand new whole array, and it's very inefficient, that sort of thing. So arrays are good in certain circumstances and often can be helpful for certain types of optimization. But for now, in terms of organization and flexibility, we like to use lists. And there are ways to convert back and forth. Like we converted a list to an array before, we can also convert an array to a list using this method here. Okay. One cool thing about arrays, though, is that you can have multi-dimensional arrays, right? You can have an array that has rows and columns in it. So if you had things like a matrix, you would you'd want to use an array for that. Okay, that allows you to create things like, kind of sparse arrays or two-dimensional arrays that have certain elements at certain locations and so on. So that's something to keep in mind. If you did have something like, in some cases, like even the pixel buffer that informs what your screen looks like is sort of a multi-dimensional array of pixels. It has a certain number of rows and a certain number of columns, and each position has a red, green, and blue value that determine what's on your screen, right? So a two-dimensional array, a good thing to think about is like the actual screen on your computer is a multi-dimensional array of pixels. It has a number of rows and a number of columns, right? We won't spend too much time. I don't think, for the most part, you really won't deal with multi-dimensional arrays in our projects, but it's good to be aware of them. So if you need to keep track of something like that. Jagged lists and arrays, these are more, we include these just for completeness, but be careful of these things. You can wind up in working with strings, for lists and arrays, that you can wind up with things that are not necessarily sort of neatly rectangular, where you have a certain number of rows and columns. You might have a different number of elements in each sort of row of your collection. So you can do kind of odd things where the 0th element of the array has has 4 strings on it, and maybe the 3rd one only has a single string on it, and so on and so on. So be careful of that. Yes, you still have to say, okay, because you do have to tell it how many dimensions it has, right? This is a two-dimensional array. You can have three-dimensional arrays. You can have potentially, 4-dimensional arrays, and so on and so on. You can get real crazy. Haven't seen many uses of that outside of, kind of really, really complex research into the kind of like network traffic research and creating various supercomputer architectures and things where there's like super connected nodes and stuff like that. But anyway, that's a whole nother. There are uses for those. If you're into that sort of thing, we can talk about that later down the ride. But for the most part, 1- and 2-dimensional arrays or matrices are usually more than enough. Sometimes 3-dimensional, as we're talking about X, Y, and Z, of course. All right. So again, when should you use one or the other? When should you use a list? When should you use an array? They both have pros and cons. For now, lists kind of win out because they have flexible length, whereas arrays, it's kind of more difficult to change the length and manage the length. Arrays may be slightly faster in certain sorts of performant operations because they have less overhead. They're just like very lean and stripped down. Arrays allow for multi-dimensional indices, so you can have easier referencing of 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, and so on. They also allow for empty elements in the middle of the collection, so that's kind of a bonus to arrays. But they do require more planning and thought up front. So because lists, they take less forethought because they are more flexible in terms of length and adding elements in between and managing the size and so on. Lists are very attractive for prototyping. And since we're doing prototyping and it requires lots of flexibility, it's very useful in that circumstances. So we'll kind of use those for the most part. Now, are there other collection types? Sure. There are things like dictionaries, which if you're coming from like JavaScript or Python, you might be familiar with. They do exist as well, but we're not really going to use them because they're not quite as well integrated with the Unity editor and engine, and they're generally not as efficient performance-wise as arrays and lists. Arrays and lists are far more generic. If there's something where you were really trying to, create some sort of data structure for saving a file to disk or something, then you might be using dictionaries. But maybe we'll use those later. But be aware that they don't really get used a lot because of some of the integration issues. So, summarizing, collections can use can hold any number of objects of a particular type. Lists are generally more useful, more flexible because they are more flexible. Arrays can be multidimensional, but you can have lists of lists, so that allows you to sort of create, pseudo multidimensional lists, because you have a list of lists and a list of lists of lists. You can do that as well. So you can get carried away if you want. So that's collections. That's the quick version of collections. Lists and arrays. That's the main point. So the next sort of pseudo collection, or there's collections involved with them sometimes, are sprites. Particularly when it comes to using sprite sheets and potentially sprite animations. Often you'll see a sprite sheet that has multiple different sprites within it. Right? So it's sort of a special case where you have things like tile maps, where you have sprite animations, where you have sprite atlases, where you might have a character that's made up of multiple different parts, and each part is located on some sort of sprite atlas, all within a single sheet. So here we have sort of a sprite sheet with multiple characters on, and there's some animations from our Crazy Birds kind of thing here. We have, some different facial animations that perhaps are all part of the same, maybe there's different representations for them, right? So the way we add them to the project, we can just sort of drag and drop images and sprites into our games. And sometimes we have to be careful to set during import. That's where we're going to tell Unity, are we dealing with a single sprite, or are we going to be working with sets of sprites? Okay. So we're going to start to use sprites now. We want to have actual graphics in our games. So the first game where they didn't have much of graphics in there, we just had, buttons and some sounds. And the basic rule is, feel free to create your own graphics if you want, or if you want to use, any of these resources. I recommend free assets. There are plenty of free assets at the Unity store even. If you want to look for the Sunnyland Forest is one I like to use a lot, and Buy It Games has a great bunch of different platformer assets and so on. But feel free, to use whatever assets you like and look at some of these different sources. Open Game Art, itch.io, Game Dev Market, Reddit, and so on and so on. All right. Often they do include animations, right? So for example, here we have a sprite sheet that includes a sort of a run animation, a walk animation, a jump animation, and a walk up animation for our character. So that's what this section here, our little character in his little snowsuit. This part up here, which is kind of an odd looking sprite sheet, is typically referred to as a sprite atlas. And this might be a group of sprite objects that together form a object that has components that can each be maybe animated or moved independently. So here, this little, I don't know if it's a sort of a dog craft that has some kind of tail, and it's going to have thrusters, and I think these are the legs. So they're put together in this sprite sheet or sprite atlas, and then you can kind of put them together in the game as sort of individual components, right? So this is a multi-part sprite. I'll show a little bit later. Animation is going to be very useful. We're going to be using them in Mecanum or Unity's animation system. I don't think many people even refer to it as Mecanum anymore, but just Unity's animation engine. It supports a bunch of great ways to animate sprites through flipbooks or by using multi-part sprites, so on. Okay. So that's sprites. Now, let's do the following. So let's see. I'm going to let's see if I can find that sprite. I'm going to go ahead and copy that. I wonder if I can bring that into Unity. I've never tried to bring it right from my So if I came over here and I said paste, it's a shame. I like that sprite sheet. I don't know where I got that one. Save to keep. I'm going to say save image as that particular, and we're going to save that just to, I'm going to put it just on my D drive here, and we'll call it Snow Kid. Okay, save Snow Kid right on my D drive. And now I'm going to go ahead and say under assets, I could say import. I import the new asset here. I'm going to try it this way. D. And we'll see Snow Kid PNG and say import. Okay. So I was able to import the Snow Kid right there. Done. Right. Assets are really anything that we can use. So I just imported Snow Kid here. And I'm going to put Snow Kid in my, I have an images directory and a, okay, in my images directory, I have Snow Kid. So let's create a new game, a new scene that's not our other one. We'll go to scenes. And this one is going to be, for now, we'll open up the apple tree scene and just go to the main camera. All right. And then we'll go to images, and we have Snow Kid here. So we have a new scene, and say I wanted to bring in Snow Kid. So I grab Snow Kid and I drag him into the scene, and this is what he looks like. It's not great. Snow Kid is made up of, he's just a sheet that's got lots and lots of Snow Kid on him. He's imported as a single texture, and that's no good. So to turn that into a collection of sprites, I have to change how it's imported. So I click on Snow Kid. You'll see over here in the inspector now, it's showing my import settings. It says, okay, Snow Kid is a single sprite. I click on that and I say, no, I want Snow Kid to be multiple sprites. Okay. And now I would have to say, okay, how many pixels per unit? So for now, I'm going to launch the sprite editor. It's going to ask me, do you want to apply that? Say, okay, apply. I see here's Snow Kid, and I can slice Snow Kid now. I'm going to say slice Snow Kid according to grid by, oh, it's going to be a tough one here. Cell count, no. He's kind of set up funny. In fact, Snow Kid isn't going to work particularly well because Snow Kid doesn't have, Snow Kid has a solid white background. So automatically slicing Snow Kid is going to be really, really a pain. I could go in and start with my sprite editor. I could slice up Snow Kid by hand and say, okay, there's my first one. And let's then generate another one. Let's see. There's one. And I could then go and say, okay, there's my third one. There's my, whoops. There's a fourth one. And I've never preferred to do this by hand. This can be certainly tedious. But in the end, if I went through the whole process, so I've created 3 at least, or a couple, some badly formed sprites here. And I could say apply. You'll see now over in my asset library here, I've got Snow Kid 0, 1, 2, and 3 that I can refer to. And if I bring Snow Kid into the scene, you'll notice this Snow Kid. I want to get rid of that one. It's going bad Snow Kid now. I'll grab this Snow Kid, put him in the scene. and this snow kid, put him in the scene, and so on. So from that one sprite, one bitmap, I've created a couple of different potential sprites for that. Okay, so these belong to this same sheet of sprites there, right? So normally, when you're doing animations or when you're doing things, you want to find sprites and sprite sheets that include transparency. You want them to have transparent backgrounds. So let's see if I can find something a little bit more interesting. And as always, transparent sprite sheet. There we go. Let's see what we got. Now, one of the giveaways is usually you'll see this background, this checkerboard background. All right. So that's kind of the giveaway that, yes, this is a transparent sprite. Let's see. I am not a robot. Allow. Oh, wait. Where are we? Did we try clicking the object and rename it? So I don't know why that one didn't allow me to grab that sprite sheet. Let's see if I grab another one. I think I got a better one. Yeah. All right. And we'll look at this one, then we'll stop, and then we'll make room for working on the project here. So here, we have a Sonic sprite. I'm going to look at that one and tell that one that it is a multiple sprite. Go into the sprite editor. So you can see here now we have multiple sprites with a transparent background, and they are evenly aligned, which is nice. Right. So this makes for a much better sprite experience here. So here we can actually say grid by, let's see, you can try automatic slice. So you see it is found because of the transparent background, it was able to find the individual sprites if we wanted them. Right. You know, there are different sizes, which might not be the thing we want. So we might still go, let's do grid by cell size. And 64 by 64. Nope, that didn't align. Let's try 128 by 128. Still not quite, right? Let's see. Oh, that's too much. So we want it to probably be something like that. So that's going to be, is it 110? Maybe 96. Let's see. All right, let's try it again here. Slice. (96 by 96). Nope. And that looks like still not big enough. Maybe they're, well, Anyone want to guess? Objects in the scene, the inspector prevents him from renaming him. It's bizarre. Okay. Did you restart Unity? Someone was recommending. Okay. Well, from here, let's see. If we looked at the first one, let's select this first one. Let's try to get that one correct. So it almost looks, I said 128 by 128 at one point, right? So let's see. Oh, that's not the one. Boy, it really makes me think that they're 100 by 100. Not quite. Well, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's do it this way. We can say there's 6 rows and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 columns. So yeah, okay. So we'll do this by cell count, which is 6 rows, or sorry, 9 columns, 6 rows. There we go. Pretty good. And now if we said apply, it's not really ideal, but the better idea, or the one great thing you could do, is actually just go to the asset store. And a lot of the assets in the asset store are already sort of divided up into the right sizes. But now you can see I've got, various sprites that are more or less correct. And I could then use them as part in animations and so on. So it's useful. Here's the whole collection of them there. All right. Yeah, there's a couple of different modes. One is, I just did the columns and rows, so you can kind of cut it up that way, or you can cut it up by the size of the sprite, or you can even say automatic, in which case it'll kind of do a tight box around each sprite according to the transparency. So if the person who created the sprite sheet, did the right thing, then it can make it a lot easier or harder, one way or the other, with regards to when you do your import from it. When you are getting stuff from the asset store, quite often you'll get things that are already sliced up as a tile sheet or a sprite sheet. Make life a lot easier that way as well. For our first game, in the apple picker, you really don't need to have lots and lots of different sprites. Chances are you just want to have like a few. You have the enemy at the top of the screen. You have the apples that are dropped, and you have baskets that are going to be used to catch the apples. So you really only need like 3 sprites. So normally I go with something like, I have a Lego chest that I use to catch the apples, and then I have a apple that I drop, and somewhere I also have a Lego tree that I use to kind of move across the screen. So if you look for transparent sprites, you'll be able to find those sort of things. Or you can draw your own if you have something like Photoshop or Krita or something like that. And you want to create something that has a transparent background. The transparent background is really the key to selling it. You can see obviously here, this does not look as cool as the transparent background ones. So, all right. So that was the brief introduction to collections and the hint as far as sprites go. For your next game, I would say try to find go to the asset store, look up some 2D. Let's see, if we go to the asset store, for example, and you look for here, you can say oops, let me stretch that too far. You can, let's see, close that one. Let's look for 2D characters. And you'll be able to find, or a 2D, let's just look for 2D and free assets. And you'll see there's a bunch of them. The Buy It Games one is always really cool. Ansimuz, Ansimuz. He makes a great bunch of packs. Oh yeah, there's if you go to Kanos and find the pixel art platformer, I use that to create my. I should show you the Halloween one. I did a one with in this particular asset pack. They have a scarecrow that was the the enemy I used in the game. One of these. Yeah. So I created the Scarecrow as the bad guy, and he dropped rocks and things, and you had to catch it in your, I forget what you caught it in, a box or something like that. So here's a great asset pack if you want to, and it's free. So it's lots and lots of cool stuff in there, already kind of divided up and stuff for you. So highly recommend that one, or use your imagination. There's no rule on which asset pack to use, but this one I highly recommend. It's very cool. Okay. On that note, give you stuff to think about. Digest collections. We won't talk about prefabs just yet, and then so next time we'll really kind of dive more into how we're going to use those in the project, right? Because we're going to be using we're going to be using lists quite a bit, because we have things like lists of baskets, your resources that you're using, and then lists of apples that are dropped, or things that are dropped on you. We're also going to get into using prefabs, which are kind of a way to create sort of template objects inside of Unity as well. But let's use the rest of today as sort of I'll do check-ins directly with people via direct message, and then if you have any other specific problems for your project, now is a great time to kind of make sure that you're addressing them. Okay. So does anyone have any questions for the whole group before I stop the streaming? About the project. Okay. Yes. Yeah, there should be, basically some sort of celebration, anything from a yay or a buzzer going off, or, that sort of thing. Something simple. Yes. If you have implemented in your congratulations scene, there should be something in that scene that has, a sound that plays when you get to that scene. Ta-da! Whatever. That sort of thing. That's fine. It's if you want to have it all within the scene, that same scene, and have some kind of congratulations, you won, and then have a button that appears that allows you to restart the game or something like that, as long as there's a definite way of letting the player know, yes, they won, they achieved the goal, they found whatever, there has to be a clear win scenario. Okay. So exactly how you implement that, it doesn't necessarily have to be another scene. If you want to use another scene, that's certainly cool. Ideally, if you have a congratulations scene, it's nice to have a play again or try again. If you have a you died scene, it's always good to have, use that same structure of, launching a scene to go back to the game and allow the player to play again. That's always a good thing to have. Any other group questions? Okay. So if I open up right now, let's see. As of right now, on the Unity Hub, I see I have Ray J5, Jelen J, Trioff. Okay, just the newest ones. AKOPYA, QINM, McLars 2, Zheng Z5, NIGOGM, and those are all the ones that definitely have been shared. Hold on, let's see how refresh. Let me refresh. Is that chance? Now, we discovered with one person who we kind of went through the process with, it's a good idea to double check. If you go into Unity and you go to your page, we discovered a circumstance where they were able to, let's see, I'll go to my dashboard here, I think. Go to developer dashboard. Where they had tried to add me to the project, But what happened for some reason is that they did add me to the project. They did add me to their organization, but they did not enable collaboration for the project somehow, which I didn't think you could actually get to all the other stuff with that. So that's, let me show you real quickly what that piece of it is. Just double check here. So here we are. Whoops. So I'm gonna crunch this down just a little bit there. So let's see. I can go here and hopefully. Come on, Unity. Time to have a sip of. Oh, Unity. Yeah, let's see. I was going to jump to that. There we go. And it went back to there. So let me go to manage organizations. This is another way to kind of sneak my way through. All right. All right. So just in case I see anyone who can go through our projects here, you'll see that there are projects. And if I go to a particular project, in here, we'll see all the settings for that project and collaborate. So you see right now, this hasn't been shared. So I could say, well, select an organization to share it with. Wait, that's not true. This has definitely been shared. Oh, no, this hasn't been, this has been pushed up, but not shared. No, that's true. All right, so I could choose an organization. I'm going to choose my organization. Oh, no, not transfer. What am I doing here? No. That was not a good thing. Collaborate. Settings. Unity Teams. Let's go to that one first, see if I've enabled that there. Okay, it's telling me I'm already set on this one. And collaborate. Go through the possible things that you might have to see here. All right, in the overview, you'll see in overview, there's a collaborate piece here. That needs to be checked. If it's not checked, definitely check that. Okay. So make sure that that collaborate is enabled there. Right? And Unity's not always. I don't know if I don't really love their website. Their web interface is not my favorite thing. Oh, there we go. Overview. Especially when I'm streaming and I'm putting myself on the spot. So we can say go to collaborate. And no, that's not what I wanted to do. My overall settings here. Ads, analytics, cloud build. Oh, users. There we go. Sorry. Users. Here we go. All right. So under here, you should see that you have shared it, and it should say that there are members. If not, if you don't see me shared as a member of your group, not necessarily the manager, you can make sure just to put ameree@rpi.edu and add me directly there. Okay. If I'm already if it's already shared with me as part of the group, it'll tell you that. You'll see the email address you provided already exists for this project, but it never hurts to kind of add it there directly. Okay. So under settings users, you should see me listed on there, and you should see me listed with a Teams access next to it, unless you've added me through the organization, in which case it might just see you see type here, and you don't see Unity Teams access as part of the org thing there. Right. It really doesn't matter. You can put me as guest or user or manager, owner, whatever you want. It's as long as I have access is the main thing. If you are in doubt, you can put me as manager, and then this way, if I need to go in and actually kind of help with some of the access, you can do that. But guest or user is fine as well. You can hope for that. Start with user or guest, and we'll work from there. Okay. Okay. Let me double check, because like from here, let's see. Let me make sure. And did you add me through an organization? And what's your organization? Okay, I see that organization. And here is the project. I should be able to, yeah. Let's give it a second. Sometimes it takes a while if you've, in terms of getting it from here over to Unity. Let's see. Settings, users. Okay, yeah. No, I see me here. So this should be and this is, well, let me see. Because normally what I do here is I just type Yeah, sometimes I have to like stop that and restart it. But let's check one other thing, because sometimes in overview, again, this is what happened with the other. I don't know if this is sort of a new layer here. I don't know how people are getting through here. Okay. See how collaborate is not checked? Is it checked for you? Okay, now I don't know if that was me clicking it or you clicking it. Just now? Okay, so that's the same thing that happened to somebody else. I don't know how. This is in all previous versions of the class, we never had to like specifically go to this. So it might be not a new thing with the 2020 integration now for some crazy reason. So for those of you, anyone else, make sure go to all your projects, select that project, select overview, and make sure that collaborate is checked. And I bet now it's probably, if I can, sometimes if I go to like, and just sort of wait for it to, oh, here we go. Refresh cloud projects. Come on, here we go. I have a good feeling about this. I'm always the optimist, though. Here we go. All right, so it's ready to go, and then I will download it from there. All right. So hopefully, thank you, and hopefully everybody learned from that that process that going through. All right. I'm going to stop the stream now, though, and I'll double check with everybody and try to follow up if we needed any with check-ins and whatnot. I do want to make sure, at least to it, that I've like gone through and said hello to folks on the through a direct message for checking in. All right. Otherwise, just send me a Discord message. I will be around, after 7 o'clock or so. I'll get a little bit more sporadic, but I'll be around, and I'll be around tomorrow. Except, the game development 1 projects are also due tomorrow, so I'm going to be a little bit busy with that on and off. So bear that in mind. Okay, take care.